Crimson Tide Sports Network from Learfield, live from Baumhauer's Victory Grill in Vestavia Hills, Alabama. Welcome to Crimson Tide Rewind, presented by Bud Light. It's for the fans. Golden Flake, the official potato chip of the Alabama Crimson Tide. And by Baumhauer's Victory Grill, legendary fun, legendary food, and the official watch party location of the Crimson Tide. Now live, this is Crimson Tide Rewind. Here's Roger Hoover.
You're back.
Welcome to Crimson Tide Rewind, presented by Bud Light. Welcome, everybody. This is Roger Hoover filling in for Eli Gold, joined by Corey Reamer. We've got the whole crew with us tonight. Ethan Carabin producing this live stream for us for the video on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We got Todd Robbins, of course, is our engineer, and then back at our Learfield studios, we have Jacob Smith as well as Jerry Kelly. But again, we're glad to have Corey Reamer with us as Alabama improved to 2-0 on the season, and I'm sure for you, it was a very hot morning and afternoon in Austin, Texas, is our sideline reporter.
It was a long day, but it was a great experience. Unfortunately, it was not the greatest of games that we were all expecting to have going into it. 11 o'clock kick. It was hot on the sideline. I know it got hotter as the day went on. It was actually pretty nice when we kicked off, and then about 1 o'clock it started getting pretty warm there in that second half of the game.
You feel like it had much of an effect on the Crimson Tide or the Longhorns as the game went along?
You know, probably. I mean, it's whenever it's that hot, you're going to wear out a little bit. But these guys have been practicing both Alabama. It's not like we were practicing up in the Northeast or anything. It was, we've been practicing in camp in this type of temperature, and Alabama has been hot this fall. So nothing too crazy. We were all, I think we were prepared. We were conditioned. I don't know. It looked like it might have had some effects on us for sure, with a very uncharacteristic game from Alabama in terms of penalties and just mental mistakes that we just don't see from this team, especially coming into this season with the maturity and leadership that we expected to have with guys that were returning, that were great players for us last year. Some of those guys were the ones making mistakes, and those are the ones that you don't expect to.
And even with all the penalties, some of the mental mistakes, as you mentioned, and the offense just couldn't get much going in the second half when it still mattered. You have to get the go-ahead touchdown. You have to get the game-winning field goal. They were able to produce.
Yeah, there was a lot of negative things that we could talk about from this game. It was not pretty by any means for Alabama. But at the end of the day, you put the ball in the hands of Bryce Young, and he leads a phenomenal drive at the end to give Will Reichert a chance to kick the game-winning field goal. And I think I heard the stats that he was 14 of 19 or something in the fourth quarter with 130 yards passing or something like that. I mean, he turned it on when it mattered. I mean, he came up and showed up in a big way for us to get that win. And it was not easy for about 3.5 quarters.
But the Crimson Tide did get the win again, 20-19, the final score from Austin, Texas on Saturday. To join us tonight on Crimson Tide Rewind, you can give us a call on the Yellowhammer Brewing Hotline, 877-202-BAMA, as we're going to be with you for the next hour and want to take as many calls as possible. So once again, the Yellowhammer Brewing Hotline, 877-202-BAMA. We want to hear from you. Stay tuned for more. It's Crimson Tide Rewind, live from Baumhauer's Victory Grill in Vestavia Hills. This is the Crimson Tide Sports Network from Learfield. Alabama improves to 2-0 on the season with the 20-19 win over the Texas Longhorns this past Saturday in Austin, Texas. A reminder, you can keep up with everything Alabama with the Alabama Crimson Tide mobile app presented by Cadence Bank. It's available at the App Store and Google Play. You can download Alabama Crimson Tide mobile app now for free. If you'd like to join us on the show tonight, give us a call at 877-202-BAMA. That's the Yellowhammer Brewing Hotline. And the first call tonight is always presented by Alabama 811. Alabama 811, reminding you to call 811 before you dig. Let's go to Pace, Florida. Let's say hello and roll tide to Parker, who joins us now. Roll tide, Parker.
Roll tide, Roger. I mean, I was at work during the game listening to the broadcast and about having a heart attack. But I just want to hats off to Will Reichard. Will Reichard and Bryce Young, I just want to give those two guys the biggest bro hug. And, God, what an amazing win. Something I'll never forget. But roll tide.
Yeah, appreciate it, Parker. It was great. I tell you what, Will Reichard, Steve Sarkisian calls the timeout, too, right before he's about to go for the game-winning field goal. And he's cool as cucumber, man, and he always has been. And Alabama's gotten used to him showing up. We enjoy having a guy like Will Reichard on the sideline that you can just rely on. It's definitely a blessing to have him. But that last drive that Bryce Young put together, finding Trayshawn Holden, I think 3 or 4 times, moving the ball down the field and avoiding that sack at the end of the game, that would have been probably a really good chance of ending that ball game or keeping us out of field goal range. His mobility, his instincts to be able to avoid that sack and then make a play with his feet to get us into field goal range, it was unbelievable. I couldn't believe my eyes. When we had got the ball back with a minute 30 seconds, I believe, or minute 20 seconds at the end of the game, there wasn't probably a lot of Alabama fans who had a lot of faith that we were going to be able just to get in field goal range after watching us for 3.5 quarters, because Texas came in with a great game plan. Their defense played extremely well, and we kept shooting ourselves in the foot, especially on the offensive side of the ball. A lot of drop balls. We're going to have to get some things cleaned up from those receivers, because it's something that we're not used to after the last few years of having some first-round draft picks out there at wide receiver. And seeing some of these guys last week that performed so well coming out and dropping balls, it's just very I don't know exactly what it was, that maybe from – playing so well last week, and there was a lot of headlines about how good we were. Alabama's back, and we're going to roll over Texas. Texas isn't ready for us. I don't know if that had anything to do with got in our heads and how we perform, but it was definitely a very ugly. It wasn't clean at all, and for us to put a drive together when it mattered was huge for this team. Big learning experience for down the season. Luckily, we were able to sneak away with a win now, go back and watch the tape. Coach Saban talked about how we practiced last week early, that we've got to prepare for these games. You can either make practice really hard and the game's easy, or the games or practice really easy and the game's hard. And it was obvious that we made this game about as difficult as we possibly could.
Just thankful the Crimson Tide got the win again. 20-19 was the final score as Alabama improves to 2-0 on the season. We will continue talking about this game. And again, we'd love to hear your calls. The Yellowhammer Brewing Hotline, the number again, 877-202-BAMA. Thanks to Parker for being our first call tonight, presented by Alabama 811. We'll be back with more Crimson Tide Rewind in just a moment. This is the Crimson Tide Sports Network from Learfield.
Backfield, he gets the handoff, goes right side, cuts it up 20, 25, 30, foot race, 40, across midfield, 45, 40, forget catching him, 20, 15, 10, 5, touchdown, Alabama. The Tide rolls on an 81-yard touchdown run from Jace McClellan, and Bama quickly goes back on top.
Chris Stewart on the call, filling in, of course, for Eli Gold, and I'm filling in for Eli, of course, tonight as well. I'm Roger Hoover alongside Corey Reamer, and that was really one of the most explosive plays of the game. Jace McClellan showing off his speed, 81 yards, and that was a very quick drive for Alabama.
Yeah, it was, and it was probably the best drive outside the last one at the very end. You know, we come out, and the offense moves the ball a little bit, gets ourselves in field goal position, gets some points on the board with the first drive of the game. Texas responds, does the same thing, comes down, gets a field goal, ties it up. And then all of a sudden we turn around and hit a big play right out the chute, and it seems like, okay, we finally settled in. Here we go. It's about to take over. We're going to win this game like we're supposed to and dominate like we're supposed to. But unfortunately for us, it was really the last time that we had some offensive production outside of a couple field goals, or one more field goal, I think, until the end of the game. So great play by Jace McClellan, finding the hole. I was standing right there. He ran clean. I don't think anybody touched him. I mean, he's just got that explosive power. These running backs are still trying to find their footing, it seems like. We've had a couple games now where they've busted these big plays. And that's great. We need those big plays, and that's, as a defense, what you're trying to eliminate. Unfortunately, what we have seen is that we haven't been able to run between the tackles and really dominate the line of scrimmage and get those 3, 4, 5 yards per rush that we need on a consistent basis. It's been very inconsistent from that standpoint. Puts our offense in these second and third and longer situations. And then we've got to get, it's an obvious drop back passing situation. Texas was able to pin their ears back and come apply pressure to Bryce Young and got to him a pretty good amount, definitely affecting all the routes and his timing of all the routes this weekend.
How would you assess the play of the offensive line so far?
I think they're still there's some new faces out there. I think they're doing a great job. Bryce Young's doing a phenomenal job of recognizing what the defense has given us, checking into the best opportunity to protect himself and give him time in the pocket. But he seems to be having to make more plays with his feet, as we've seen. Good thing is that he's really good on his feet, and he's had a lot of explosive plays with his feet the last 2 weeks. It's just not what we want to see. We want to see those clean pockets, be able to assess what's going on downfield. The amazing thing about him is that even when he does feel pressure, he's able to sense where it's coming from and keep his eyes downfield. We saw that a couple times this game, finding wide open guys with 3 Texas defenders in his face. Offensive line's got some things to clean up. Maybe it's a communication thing. Running backs being able to pick up some when they're bringing more guys than we can block. Bryce knows that. He knows he's got to get the hot route and get the ball out. But just on standard four-man rush, we've got to be able to block a little bit better and keep the pocket clean. And luckily, we were able to improve a little bit, but we've still got a decent amount of ways to go.
Again, to join us tonight on Crimson Tide Rewind, just give us a call on the Yellowhammer Brewing Hotline, 877-202 Bama. And coming up tomorrow at 2 o'clock on the CTSN Facebook page, we'll have our show Crimson Drive, driven by NASCAR, where we have one-on-one conversations with Alabama football players. And one of the things when we talked to Jahmyr Gibbs today about was he's like, Bryce Young was smiling. He was laughing on the sideline, and just before we were about to take the field for that go-ahead touchdown drive, and then later the game-winning field goal. I mean, what does that say about his composure? And he showed this last year in the Auburn game as well. He is so comfortable in moments like that.
Yeah, and I stood next to him when the defense was on the field at the very end, and Texas had the ball moving to be able to go down and kick that go-ahead field goal. He was standing on the same side of the field as I was, right next to me, just as calm as he could be. And he was just watching, taking everything in. They kick a field goal. He walks over, picks his helmet up, knows what he's about to go out there and have to do, and he executes it perfectly. I mean, this guy, for as young as he is and has one season under his belt, how much he's prepared. That's what you always hear Coach Saban talk about is it's not only the talent that he has, but it's the amount of time, the film that he watches, the notes that he takes. And when he shows up to a game, he is ready. He knows what he's going to get from the defense that he's facing. He's more prepared. He spends more time learning and asking questions that when it comes time to go out there and play the game, it's nothing to him. And that shows. You can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't know what you're doing with the ball or not prepared to go out there and play well, it shows, and he's never going to be caught in that position. He's always in the film room studying, making sure that he knows what he's supposed to do. And it's a tough position to play, especially with all the faults that we had, all the drop balls, everything that could discourage a quarterback. you're losing confidence in what you're doing. You're getting pressure and you're taking a couple sacks. It's hard to keep your head up and still be able to execute at the level that he's able to execute at.
Glad he's still the quarterback of the Alabama Crimson Tide, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, Bryce Young. We'll continue talking about Alabama's win over Texas, plus start looking ahead to ULM and Saturday's game here in Tuscaloosa. But we'll continue with Crimson Tide Rewind coming up in just a moment. This is the Crimson Tide Sports Network from Learfield.
The Texas 6, empty set again. Young, pump fake, looks to his left, rolls to his left, stops, looks into the end zone. Catch is made. Touchdown, Alabama. Jahmyr Gibbs makes the grab in the back of the end zone, and Alabama has tied it up.
Chris Stewart on the call, Ethan Carabin yelling in the background in the booth of that great go-ahead touchdown for the Alabama Crimson Tide. And Corey Reamer, we continue talking about Bryce Young making off-schedule plays. That was another one, and it turned out to be the go-ahead touchdown.
Yeah, absolutely. It was one of the guys that was standing next to me on the sideline watching it. He said, did anybody up in the booth have any idea where he was going when he's rolling out? Because there was nobody on that left side of the field in a white jersey, and he somehow finds Jahmyr Gibbs in the back of the end zone. And like I said a little bit ago, he had three guys that were coming right at him, right in his face. He was able to keep his eyes downfield, find the open guy, throw him back across his body, puts it right on the money. It's a huge play, and he was running around doing that all game. It seemed like that was just the nature of this game. They were getting to us pretty good. They were bringing a lot of different packages, giving us a lot of different looks, causing some issues that were flushing him out of the pocket, and he was making plays with his feet.
Certainly was. Again, you can join us on the show tonight, but give us a call on the Yellowhammer Brewing Hotline, 877-202-BAMA, or you can also be part of the show by submitting your question to Corey Reamer on the Alabama Media Group Twitter line at Corey Reamer 13. That's C-O-R-Y, and then Reamer, R-E-A-M-E-R 13. That's AL.com, your source for SEC sports. Alabama gets the win, 20-19, and how much better does this win look like when you see everything else that was crazy on this college football Saturday?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this week 2 is always an interesting week. It always is. You always get these first games. Teams come out, look good, and a lot of people were too early, giving them too much credit. How good are these guys? And then you start to see some of these teams that are falling. You saw a lot of top 10, top 15 teams that go down this weekend, and we were that close to being in the same highlight reel as some of these guys. Florida played well last week. Everybody's expecting them. They jump from unranked all the way up to 12th in the country, go in, playing at home against Kentucky, end up getting upset. You see Notre Dame go down. You see Nebraska go down. There's a lot of upsets, and I think a lot of that maybe has to do with some of the parity because of maybe the NIL. I don't know what's caused some of these smaller programs to come in and get a lot of these upsets. Texas A&M going down to App State. We saw App State last week playing a really good game against North Carolina, put up 60 points and still lost, and they were able to turn around and go into College Station and find a way to win. It was big for us to come out of a hostile environment. I mean, it was loud. It was loud down there, and I think a lot of Texas fans showed up not expecting it to be as competitive as it was, but that stadium was loud from start to finish, and it showed. And Quinn Ewers came out, and I tell you what, I was really impressed with him when he was playing, because it was not fazing him. A guy that hasn't really started in a big game environment, record attendance in their stadium that day, and he looked really good. Unfortunately, goes down with an injury. He's going to miss 4 to 6 weeks. But Hudson Card comes in and plays pretty well, too. Those guys were battling for that position going into this season. It was not a clear-cut favorite who was going to be the starter, but I was really impressed with Quinn Ewers and the way he played until the injury. He was moving the ball, finding a lot of deep, open receivers that were getting behind our secondary, and Worthy. You got to talk about him. I mean, he was a playmaker, and I saw Julio Jones playing last night with the Bucks, and he was out there making some of the same catches that Worthy was making against us on Saturday. I mean, it was just unbelievable talent, speed, everything. So it was a tough test. I think Texas was definitely ready for this game. They were excited to come out there and give us a shot, and they showed up and played for 4 quarters.
How do you feel like Texas will do in the Big 12 this year?
You can't judge it all by one game. Right. I think everything that went right for them, that could have gone right, went right for them on Saturday, and we didn't play up to the standard of our program that we're expecting to play to. But I will say this: they've got a lot of good outcome. It's going to look good for them. They're going to look really good this season. I expect them to. They've got a lot of talent, a lot of guys that can play football. It's now the big test for them is how are they going to bounce back after having this close game against us. As Alabama is used to, we had a target on our back coming in this game every single week. We're not something we're not used to. They showed up and played one of the best games that they could have played. Now they've got to turn around and play a tough in-state opponent, out-of-conference opponent with UTSA, who upset Houston over the weekend. And then they turn around and play another tough game right after that. How they bounce back and play those games is really what is the defining moment of a program. And Sarkisian is probably spreading that message as this season's not over. He said that before this game. He always said this game is not going to define our year. Let's see how the team responds and if they buy into that.
It was a crazy college football Saturday. Alabama gets the 1-point victory on the road in Austin, Texas against the Texas Longhorns. We'll continue talking about that and more coming up as we're at Baumhower's Victory Grill in Vestavia Hills for Crimson Tide Rewind. You're listening to the Crimson Tide Sports Network from Learfield.
Alabama from the 37 of the Horns right here. Gibbs, Burton, Holden, all available as wideouts. Gibbs actually in the backfield right now, goes to the right of Young. Blitz coming right side, steps through it, rolls to his right, directing traffic, runs it now inside the 25, gets out of bounds inside the 20. What a play. Bryce Young maybe saving a chance for Alabama right there, avoiding the sack, gets out of bounds with 27 seconds left to play.
And Bryce knows it. Heisman Trophy right there for Bryce Young. It's a quarterback blitz, unblocked. He has to get low, shield yourself, able somehow to break the tackle and then get Alabama in field goal range at the 17-yard line.
Shield yourself. Key part of the analysis from John Parker Wilson on that great run from Bryce Young to help set up the game-winning field goal for the Alabama Crimson Tide, as Bryce, again, was elusive. He had those ice in his veins. He just knew how to get it done.
Man, what a great call by Texas on that play, too. They bring off the edge pressure from the short side of the field. Ryan Watts comes running free, has a clear shot. I think it was one of those things where, like, a dog's barking at a truck. The truck stops. Dog doesn't know what to do when he gets there, and he just runs right by him. Bryce does a great job of ducking his shoulder, avoiding the sack, and making plays with his feet. Huge pickup to put us in field goal range. And if they get us on the ground right there, it's going to be real tough to keep moving the ball with the clock running to get us a chance to get in there and get Will Reichert on the field.
Again, to be a part of tonight's Crimson Tide Rewind show, submit your question to Corey Reamer on the Alabama Media Group Twitter line at CoreyReamer13, AL.com, your source for SEC sports. We've talked about it, of course, the penalties. Alabama penalized 15 times for 100 yards, and Coach Saban was asked during his press conference about addressing that with his team, and he made the quick point that there are officials at practice each and every day. There's a grading sheet each and every day. This is something the team does work on all throughout not only fall camp getting ready for the season, but every day in practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody knows Eddie Conyers. He's always there. But they've got a whole crew down there that's always on the sidelines for every single drill that we do. There's always referees and they are not afraid to call it. They're not intimidated by Coach Saban, who gets mad at them when they throw the flag. They throw it, and we work on it all the time. The penalties that we made on Saturday, though, they were mental mistakes. It wasn't like we were out there, we had a few face masks, and we had some bad penalties. The Will Anderson personal foul, pushing the guy after he trips up, that's uncharacteristic. That's frustration. I think that was what ultimately led to that. But early on, it's offsides, false starts, all these different things that we had some momentum going, and then we'd shoot ourselves in the foot. And it would kind of be some drive killers. And we've got to clean those up, because those are the mistakes when we're going to some more hostile environments throughout the season, and there's going to be a lot of crowd noise. And it was loud. I will say that. It was loud. Texas showed up in a big way. I got to the stadium at 7:30. They let the students in, and they piled in there. They sat there for 3 hours before this game. They were ready for us.
They were loud then, too.
And they were loud there. They were saying some nice things to us. As I just remember, I think I said it on Saturday, they booed the cheerleading squad as they're walking through on the field. I've never heard anybody boo a cheerleading squad. But they showed up, and the fan base was ready. They were excited about this game for us to come back. A lot of them have been living since 2009 of the what-ifs, and I know that Fox and ESPN, everybody talked ad nauseum about the what-if Colt McCoy doesn't go down. And then, unfortunately, I think Texas fans are probably having nightmares about playing Alabama and losing quarterbacks, because the last two times we've played, that's exactly what's happened. But, yeah, we've got those are inexcusable penalties, the offsides, the false starts, just lack of focus, lack of concentration. We work on it all the time. He talks about every meeting that we have is we go out and execute the way that we're supposed to execute, we can beat anybody. But if we go we hand them penalties and give them opportunity to stick around in the game, teams are good enough to beat us, and they will. And to have, 15 penalties for 100 yards or something like that, and walk away with a win is unheard of. I mean, you usually don't have that happen. And also, we're not turning the ball over. We've gone 2 games now with no created turnovers on defense. That's another thing we've got to get. We've got to figure out a way to get pressure, get those balls out, and because that's a huge momentum changer for us. And penalties, we've got to clean that up. And he knows that. He can't. That's one thing he cannot stand is the amount of penalties that we had on Saturday.
Crimson Tide will keep working on that. Of course, tonight we're hanging out at Baumhauer's Victory Grill in Vestavia Hills, and you can celebrate 40 years of Baumhauer's Victory Grill this fall with new flavors, including Alabama hot chicken, fajita wraps, and, of course, the legendary buffalo wings. Baumhauer's Victory Grill, legendary food, legendary fun. You're listening to Crimson Tide Rewind, and this is the Crimson Tide Sports Network from Learfield.
Well, I think there's a lot to learn, from this last game.
You're clear.
I think, number one, it's not just about playing hard. I think our guys played hard in the game. They persevered in the game in tough circumstances. They overcame adversity. They showed great resiliency. But it's also about playing smart. Having good discipline to execute, focus on what's in front of you, and do your job. Not only do your job, but do it fundamentally with the correct technique, whether it's hand placement for offensive linemen, whether it's footwork for defensive backs, whether it's running your feet on contact when you're tackling. All these things are basically, fundamental things that, people have to do every day in practice, all right, so that there aren't bad habits that show up in the game. And I think that's a big lesson for us, to learn. Second thing is what does it mean to be favored by 21 points? Well, there were two teams that I know of, maybe more, I don't know, that were favored by about the same amount that actually got beat. So I guess it doesn't mean anything. And that's why we have to play the games. So it's important for players to learn that they have to focus and prepare for every team and every opponent so that they can go out there and play to the best of their ability. Because sometimes even when you win, you can lose. So the challenge for us is, from top to bottom in the organization, is to hold each other accountable, to make sure that we're putting the players in the best position to have a chance to be successful, but we're also teaching them fundamentally what they need to do to be able to have success.
That was the head coach of the Crimson Tide, Nick Saban, again meeting with the media earlier today for his Monday press conference as we start looking ahead to Saturday, Alabama against ULM in Tuscaloosa. We want to say a special thanks to Onward Reserve. They're the official apparel provider of the Crimson Tide Sports Network for the great gear this season. OnwardReserve.com has all of your game day apparel right there. You can live authentically with Onward Reserve. We're wearing it today for Crimson Tide Rewind. And again, Crimson Tide Rewind is presented by Bud Light. We'll continue talking about what's next for the Crimson Tide when we come back. This is the Crimson Tide Sports Network from Learfield.
Up, he will throw across the middle. Robinson catches it on his shoe tops. The clock says triple zeros, and let's get out of Dodge. 20-19. Alabama comes from behind late to win it. A Will Riker 33-yard field goal gives Bama the victory as Nick Saban and Steve Sarkisian shake hands at midfield. Great respect by both men, for both men and both programs, but it's Alabama that gets the victory today in Austin.
Well said by Chris Stewart, filling in for Eli Gold on the call of Alabama's 1-point victory on the road at Austin, Texas against the Texas Longhorns. Again, now we're starting to move forward towards this week in ULM, so that means it's time for the Prescription for Success. It's presented by Payless Drugs. Payless Drugs is your locally owned family pharmacy with 4 locations in Birmingham. Payless can handle your prescriptions, over-the-counter solutions, and home delivery. Payless at mynewpharmacy.com. So, Corey Reamer, it's a new week. Again, we've talked plenty about Saturday and some tough moments for the Crimson Tide and still a good win against Texas. But what about this week of practice moving forward, knowing ULM is going to come into Tuscaloosa and give Alabama its best shot Saturday?
Yeah, before we do that, I was extremely glad we were able to come away with a victory on that game, because I was standing there on the sideline and I could see and feel the fans that were converging, ready to jump on and rush the field if they win that ball game. Luckily, we come out with a victory, and that doesn't happen. We can walk off pretty safely. But now we got another week. It's another week with ULM coming in, who also had to play Texas 2 weeks ago. So tough schedule for ULM for sure. We got to rebound and go up and clean up what we had a lot of mistakes on. You heard Coach Saban talk about in that press conference about tackling. We saw a lot of arm tackles that Bijan Robinson, one of the best backs in the country, was able to break through. We got to work on wrapping up, getting guys on the ground. We've got the opportunity to. Had some guys stopped in the backfield. They were able to make some positive yards out of that. But now we've got to go in there and get some of that cleaned up. These penalties, some mental errors, be prepared. And we can't let this game affect us past Sunday. We've got to be able to forget about it. We were able to go out there and get a win. Now there's a new team on deck, and that's how it's going to be all season. Go in and focus, figure out what it is that we can do better, what we got to improve on as the season goes on, and continue to work on those things as the season progresses, because it's still a long season to go. We're only 2 games into this.
And it feels like this is a really important game for the running game, especially, to find some consistency.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we got to figure out how to what has not worked for us in these first 2 games of running between the tackles. And ULM, as Alabama fans know, remember well, I was there the last time that we played, or maybe not the last time, but when they were able to beat us in Tuscaloosa. I guess it's been about 15 years ago. But they're not a layover team. These non-conference teams that we're playing this year are definitely not pushover teams. They're good physical teams. They're going to come in and do whatever they can to beat us and give us a test. And they're only going to be encouraged by what they saw last weekend with so many upsets. But yeah, this is a game we got to get back to the basics, tackling, running the football, setting the tone with our running game, because that's what Alabama's MO is. You know, where you can tell that Bryce Young has the ability to throw the ball downfield, but for us to win ball games and to dominate the line of scrimmage like Coach Saban wants for us to see, this is a perfect opportunity to go in there and get after it. And these players got to have the mindset of this is an opportunity to get better. This is not a rest week to get ready for the SEC play next week. This is an opportunity for us to improve, get some guys out there, figure out what the combination is at the offensive line, running backs, play calling, all of it. This is a good opportunity for us to improve.
Crimson Tide and the ULM Warhawks coming up from Bryant-Denny Stadium, 3 p.m. on Saturday. Our airtime across the network will be at noon for Alabama against ULM, and then it was announced earlier today by the SEC that Alabama against Vanderbilt on September 24th will be a 6:30 p.m. Central start time. So once again, we get to see the lights on display at Bryant-Denny Stadium. We always like that.
Yeah, we love it when we get to have games at home. No easy travel, and then you get to see the light show. I was impressed with Texas Stadium, but there's nothing that compares to Bryant-Denny.
Look forward to being home the next 2 weeks, and it starts this week with ULM. We'll talk more about that when we continue as we take our final break of the night. You're listening to the Crimson Tide Sports Network from Learfield. Alabama is 2-0 on the season. Now the Crimson Tide getting ready for Saturday at home against ULM. Again, kickoff at 3 o'clock. Our radio airtime will be noon for the Crimson Tide and the Warhawks coming up from inside Bryant-Denny Stadium. As Corey Reamer and I have been talking about this past win for the Crimson Tide against Texas. And one more thing before we go about the Texas game. It has been the talk of not only Sports Talk Radio, on television ever since that game. The play in the end zone where Bryce Young was going down, originally called targeting on the field and eventually ruled an incomplete pass, but it was all very confusing for all of us, not only in the stadium, everyone watching at home and listening on the radio as well. Just what did you see on that play as it first developed?
Yeah, I imagine this play is going to be one that's talked about for a long time. I mean, it's when we were on the field and we watched it happen, we were all trying to figure out what was going on because we didn't understand the targeting call. We saw the replay on the big screen immediately and saw that there was no contact to Bryce Young's head, so obviously targeting wasn't going to be it. Then it was a personal foul. We're trying to figure out what they're trying to figure out on the replay. Is it a safety? And then you realize, and I think they got the call right. He obviously rolls over the Texas defender, never touches the ground, gets the ball out of his hands, and Jace McClellan standing at the goal line, and the ball hits off of one of Texas players' helmets. I think they got the call right, but if you're a Texas fan, you don't think they got the call right. And there's a lot of people who were discussing this at length over the weekend after this game. It was probably one of those game-changing plays for sure. No points on the board, gives us an opportunity to punt the football away, and we're walking out without having to have safety and having to kick back off to them, give their offense the ball back. But it was extremely confusing. I was talking to Chris. I'm sure you were up there, Joe Parker. We were all trying to figure out what it was, what was going on, what was the call, what were they looking for. We had a lot of things that didn't go our way, and then there was a lot of things that did, and that was one of them. And also the field goal that was missed right before halftime, actually blocked, I think is what they said. That Will Anderson was able to get his hand on it. The play before, the pass interference call on Kool-Aid McKinstry, I thought it was a perfectly played pass by Kool-Aid McKinstry. I was shocked to see the flag come out. I thought he did a great job, but that's the nature of the beast, and that's what Coach Saban talks about is you got to handle the adversity, get back, line up, play the next play, and that's what they did. That's the big picture is you take it away. We found a way to win the ball game. A lot of things went against us, and we found a way to get out of there with a W.
Kool-Aid had a lot of tackles in that game. How'd you see Alabama's corners play?
I thought they played great. I mean, I thought that for the most part, they played pretty well. I think that there was some opportunities. I don't know if it was some busted coverages, but letting some of the receivers get behind us is a big concern. And Quinn Ewers early on was able to take advantage of it. And I think Hudson Card even was limping around. You saw him take off for a run there late in the game. You saw him hobbling a little bit. I don't know if he's able to get everything underneath the football that he probably normally would have if he was healthy. But there were some opportunities that if it was a good pass, they had some receivers that were running behind our secondary. So like we said, there's just a lot for us to go back and watch this tape. I imagine Sunday was a tough day for the coaching staff early. Players show up at 1:30 and they got to review the tape. I guarantee you I've been in that video room before watching film after a game like that. It's not fun. But there's a lot we can take away from it, learn from, go out there and correct on this week, starting with today, and then forget about it. Improve on those things, forget about the game, focus on the next one, and don't let it have any effect on us as we go into the next week.
And as we mentioned, ULM is a team that will give Alabama its best shot. They're coming off a win against Nichols their last time out. You know, Terry Bowden has a lot of history, of course, going up against Alabama when he was Auburn's head coach. So it does make for a really intriguing matchup this Saturday.
Yeah, it does. And they've been in a big environment already. They played Texas earlier. So this should not be new to them. But this is an opportunity for us, like you said, for us to go out there and get better. But we can't look past them. We've got an SEC schedule that starts after this, but looking ahead is the last thing that we can do for this team. We've got to figure out how to improve, clean up the mistakes that we made last week. And it's not going to be easy. Like you said, Terry Bowden knows Alabama. They knows what this team is capable of. But like Coach Saban said, it doesn't matter. Lines don't matter. Nothing matters. You got to show up. You got to execute like we're supposed to. If we go out there and do the right things, we're going to win ball games. But as we proved last week, we go out there and hand them opportunities to stay in the ball game. Next thing you know, you're down, 2 points in the fourth quarter.
Corey did a great job for us on the sidelines at Texas. Again, you drew a tough assignment. I was the fill-in sideline guy for the home game under the lights for the week 1 against Utah State. Didn't sweat hardly at all. You, of course, were on the sidelines on that hot turf at Texas. We're going to have Christian Miller on the sidelines for us, but he'll be back with us coming up for some pre- and post-game duty as well coming up on Saturday. But again, great job done by you on the sidelines. Look forward to hearing your coverage all throughout Saturday's game as well.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide. That is Corey Reamer. I'm Roger Hoover, and just have to say thank you to everybody that's been here at Baumhower's Victory Grill in Vestavia Hills for Crimson Tide Rewind, and we'll be with you all throughout this football season on Monday nights here at the restaurant. So we really look forward to catching up with you and talking about Crimson Tide football. Again, mostly a look back at the previous game, but also starting to turn our attention to the next opponent for the Crimson Tide as well. If you missed any portion of tonight's show, you can always catch it on demand on our Alabama Insider podcast. You can download and subscribe to that wherever you get your podcast, and the podcast will be very busy coming up this week as we have another full week of Crimson Drive driven by NASCAR with a lot of interviews coming up, including conversations with Crimson Tide players. We'll be having conversations with DeMarco Helms as well as Jahmyr Gibbs. Got a full scouting report on ULM from their radio broadcaster, as well as Chris Stewart previewing Hey Coach and the Nick Saban Show, which will be coming your way coming up on Thursday night at Baumhower's Victory Grill in Tuscaloosa. Again, 6:30 will be the start time for Hey Coach and the Nick Saban Show, and then all of our coverage from Tuscaloosa on Saturday will be coming your way starting at noon. 3 hours of coverage leading you up to kickoff at 3 o'clock for Alabama against ULM, and it just is a very busy time as we get ready for that ball game. And of course, we're going to have so much for you here on the Crimson Tide Sports Network, not just on the radio, but our social media channels as well. Crimson Drive driven by NASCAR coming up on Tuesday and Thursday at 2 o'clock to help you get ready for Alabama's next challenge. Again, the Alabama Crimson Tide taking on the ULM Warhawks. So certainly hope you can join us for all of that is coming up. That's going to do it for tonight's edition of Crimson Tide Rewind. It is always presented by Bud Light, and it's always live from here at Baumhower's Victory Grill in Vestavia Hills. We have to say thanks to our on-site engineer, Todd Robbins, for doing a fine job, as always, all throughout this show. And then back at our Learfield studios, we have had Jerry Kelly and Jacob Smith at the controls, making sure you hear from head coach of the Crimson Tide, Nick Saban, as well as all the highlights. We love hearing the highlights each and every commercial break, so great job done by Jerry Kelly, Jacob Smith for all their hard work. Ethan Carabin running the Facebook live stream, not only going to Facebook, but also Twitter and YouTube as well. So thanks to him, as well as our linebacker, Corey Reamer, for joining us for another edition of Crimson Tide Rewind. But for everybody at the Crimson Tide Sports Network, this is Roger Hoover filling in tonight for Eli Gold, saying thank you for listening to Crimson Tide Rewind. Have a good night and roll Tide.